If you're a certain age and your life still doesn't make sense on paper, this is for you. And if that sentence made you uncomfortable, good. That reaction usually means it landed where it was supposed to. Let's name it without softening it. A late bloomer isn't lazy. It isn't someone who never tried. It isn't someone drifting because they can't decide. A late bloomer is someone who put in effort early, followed the instructions, adjusted when things didn't work, and still ended up off schedule. You did the work. You waited. And when it was time for something to show up, nothing really did. That's why this hurts differently than failure. Because failure gives you a shape, a cause, something you can point at and say, that's where it broke. Being a late bloomer gives you pressure without proof, age without momentum, awareness without results. You're old enough to see the gap clearly and young enough to still be blamed for it. That combination does something to your head. If this doesn't describe you, this probably isn't for you. If it does, then you already know why you kept listening. This is usually where people spiral or shut down, or force themselves into optimism, because sitting with this too long feels unsafe. Late bloomers don't need more feelings added on top. The feelings are already there, whether anyone acknowledges them or not. What happens over time is quieter than people expect. Trust shifts first. Not trust in people exactly, but in promises. Career paths that are supposed to work if you stay disciplined. Relationships that are supposed to stabilize everything else. The idea that once you hit a certain milestone, the anxiety finally eases. Late bloomers believed those stories once. They waited, and when nothing clicked, something pulled back. Now, when an opportunity appears, excitement isn't the first reaction. Instead, there's a pause, a question. That isn't bitterness, it's memory. Movement starts to feel strange too. Early on, movement feels like progress. New job, new plan, new version of yourself. As long as something changes, it feels safer. Late bloomers usually did a lot of that. Moved, adapted, recalibrated, and at some point, it becomes obvious you've been active for years and still somehow stuck. This is where people push back. If you're listening and thinking, that sounds like excuses, I get it. It can sound like rationalizing, like explaining why things didn't work instead of owning it. The problem is that explanation doesn't quite fit either. Most late bloomers did own it, repeatedly. They just didn't get the payoff everyone said came with responsibility. Failure stops being dramatic after a while, not because it stops hurting, but because it stops surprising you. Late bloomers already failed at things they cared about, already sat in the quiet aftermath, where there's no lesson montage, no sudden clarity, just a flat, okay, now what? That experience doesn't make you fearless. It makes you cautious in a very specific way. Starting again doesn't feel heroic or impossible either. It feels familiar, which is sometimes worse. Movement and failure blur together at that point. You try something, and if it doesn't convert, you adjust. If it still doesn't convert, after a while, you stop rushing just to say you're moving. That's when people start calling you hesitant, or passive, or stuck. They don't see the filtering. They don't see how unfinished attempts accumulate somewhere deeper than logic. Identity loosens around then. There's no clean moment for it. Late bloomers usually tried more than one life. Some of them collapsed. Jobs that didn't fit. Paths that expired. Versions of themselves that sounded right until they weren't livable. That leaves marks and makes confidence unreliable, or introductions awkward. But it also means identity isn't hanging on a single thread anymore. When something ends now, it hurts, but it doesn't erase you. You already learned you're not just one outcome. This is where I slow down, because this is usually where people want reassurance, and I'm not convinced that helps. Some people really do lose time. Some doors don't reopen. Waiting doesn't automatically turn into wisdom. Anyone pretending otherwise is lying. That uncertainty stays, whether you acknowledge it or not. Still, when people who study this keep watching late bloomers, the same side effects show up. One is resilience, but not the inspirational kind. The dull kind. The kind that comes from rejection no longer wrecking you. Rich Karlgaard writes about this. Late bloomers get used to not being chosen immediately. They stop tying their worth to fast validation. Life doesn't get easier, it gets steadier. They also tend to wander before committing. David Brooks calls it an explorer mindset. Late bloomers try things that don't connect. They collect experiences instead of titles. It looks inefficient because it is inefficient, but it builds perspective. When they finally choose something, it isn't because it arrived early. It's because enough alternatives failed. Empathy creeps in too. Not because they're nicer, but because they know what it's like to struggle quietly, to put in effort without applause, to feel pressure without evidence you can hand to someone else. They recognize fragility faster when they see it. Uncertainty becomes more tolerable as well. Living without answers for years is exhausting. Not knowing who you are, not knowing where this goes, but it trains something. When clarity disappears later, they don't immediately panic. They've been here before. They didn't disappear then either. Surface-level success loses some of its shine. Titles, money, confidence theater, the performance of having it together. Late bloomers have seen enough behind the curtain. They still compare themselves. Everyone does. They're just harder to seduce by appearances. And when they finally commit, it's usually quiet. No announcement, no reinvention speech. They know how fragile beginnings are. They've watched things die from too much pressure, too much exposure, too much expectation. So they move privately, small steps, ones that don't look impressive. That's often when things actually start to shift, if they do. I don't fully trust all of this yet. I don't trust the idea that patience always turns into something worth the wait. There are things I hesitated on that still haven't paid off. I don't know if they will. What I do know is that being late didn't leave you empty. It left marks. Some of them hurt. Some of them hold. I'm still sitting with that. If this felt familiar, you don't need fixing. You just need a place where this makes sense. I'll be here.